Good evening, Scar Island readers, listeners. Miss Beth here to read chapter 22 in Scar Island. The last one to remind you, I know I always need reminding, was Fires and Flowers. And Jonathan went down to finally go downstairs or into the depths of the place to find Colin where he was hiding, and finally finds him, and they get into a conversation about why, uh, why our hero Jonathan is there in the first place. And Jonathan tells him about the fire and everything, and his good friend tells him that it was an accident. Right? He didn't mean to do it. Obviously, it was a horrible thing to have happen to poor Jonathan, and and that he would always put flowers on her grave and his sister's grave, and then his parents promised to do it while he was gone. And then he left him. He woke up, and there was a piece of a paper um, crane lying on his pillow with a perfect flower and the uh, shape of a flower made out of shiny gold, with a shiny gold center, which of course was made from the wrappers of the chocolate that he'd stolen when he came up, went into Sebastian's room. Okay, 22. It's called Caught. Not a good word. Jonathan's fifth letter home starts this chapter. Dear Mom and Dad, I miss you. Thank you for the letters. I'm sorry, not for what you think, for everything else. I really am. Please give my love to Sophia. Love, Jonathan. Last chance, Johnny boys. Sebastian's voice was a snarl. Outside, the wind howled with fierce strength between the crumbling towers of Slabhenge. Lightning flashed on puddles growing and spreading across the courtyard stones. Thunder scared the window glass into shaking. Interesting way of saying it. Thunder scared the window glass into shaking. Quite a storm this is. The storm had been growing all day. Jonathan had watched it rage and strengthen through the windows. He'd been locked inside during the mail exchange. He hadn't bothered going to see the librarian or Colin. He knew he'd have plenty of time for that when Sebastian banished him. It had been a long day. He'd read most of Treasure Island. But now the sun had set, the day was over, his deadline had expired. All the world was dropping into storm and darkness. I don't know where he is, Jonathan lied. Liar! Jonathan looked away. He was seated at one of the long dining room tables. Benny and Francis stood on either side of him. All the other boys were standing around watching nervously. Fine, it's your funeral. Jonathan pushed a paper and pen across the table to him. Write what I say. Exactly what I say. Benny, check his words. Jonathan pursed his lips, then picked up the pen. There was no use fighting. It would only make things worse. Dear Mom and Dad, Sebastian started, and Jonathan rolled his eyes and copied the words onto paper. Everything is going fine. The food is good and I'm learning a lot. Sebastian lowered his voice. Add an exclamation point to that. Make it look cheerful. His eyes rose to the ceiling in concentration. I won't be able to write for a while. We are... Sebastian paused and squinted one eye, drumming his lips with his fingers. We're getting ready for a big test. I love you and miss you lots. Love, Johnny. Sebastian lowered his eyes and glared across the table. Love, Jonathan. Jonathan's pen scratched across the paper, and then he set it down. How'd you do, Benny? Fine, he wrote it just what you said. Sebastian rose to his feet. That's your last letter home, Johnny. Give him a couple candles and a book of matches. His eyes dropped back down to Jonathan, and he smiled, although I don't know if we can really trust him with matches. With an echoing crash, the door to the courtyard swung open and smashed into the stone wall. They all jumped and turned. Rain blew through the open door, spattering the dark stone wall. Some of the candles they lit blew out in the wind that blustered in among them. Damn it! Close that door, Reggie! Sebastian shouted. Lightning flashed and a rumble of thunder cracked, sounding unnaturally loud through the open door. And make sure it's closed all the way this time. When the storm was once again locked mostly outside, Sebastian turned back to Jonathan. Say hi to the little rat for me. I hope you two have lots of fun. Jonathan was jerked to his feet. Candles and matches were pressed into his hand. Sebastian stalked around the table and poked him with the sword. Go on, he said, prodding Jonathan toward the door that led into Slabhenge's dark interior. Go ahead and find your friend, and don't come crawling back here. You two made your choice. He was pushed through the doorway into the familiar musty shadows of the corridor. Good night, Sebastian's voice echoed after him. Sleep tight. With trembling fingers, Jonathan struck a match. He held a sputtering flame to a candle wick, then quickly dropped it with a hiss into a puddle at his feet. The rain was falling even harder now than it had been the morning the admiral and his men were struck down. Slabhenge inside and out was all dripping and puddles. Jonathan bit his teeth together hard and started off into the darkness. It took him a while to find Colin's tower hideout. He'd been wandering the first time he'd found it, and this time he had to circle and peer and look for landmarks. He remembered what Colin had said about everything in Slabhenge being connected and kept walking. He stopped from time to time to listen. The rats seemed more than normally large and active, especially behind him. Maybe it was the storm, which was howling and thundering loud enough to be heard even through the thick stone walls. At one point, as he wandered, he passed one of the staircases that he knew led down to the hatch. It was wild tonight, knocking and rocking and echoing up from the darkness, like a demon thrashing against chains ready to break. He swallowed and pressed on, looking for Colin's refuge. And then there it was. The long hallway with the 4 doors. The little paper bird hiding in the darkness. Jonathan slipped through the door and up the stairs. Colin was sitting on his bed. Paper, some folded and some not, lay scattered and piled on the bed and floor around him. 4 candles sat around the bed on the floor. Startling splashes of white light flashed through the windows from the storm outside. Colin was facing the door, chewing on a bright red apple. Hey, he said with a smile as brief and bright as the lightning. I was hoping that with you. A ferocious blast of wind whistled in through the broken window, shuffling the loose leaves of paper into a swirl of scattered white. One of the candles flickered out. When the gust had died down, Colin calmly relit the smoking wick with one of the other candles. You're here late, Colin said. Jonathan took a couple of steps into the room. I'm here for good. What do you mean? Sebastian. He said I had to leave. I'm like kicked out. Colin's brow furrowed and he pinched it at his neck with one hand. I thought he wanted to catch me. Yeah, he does. Colin squinted one eye and cocked his head. Well, don't you think he'd just follow you? Jonathan opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, he heard the distant creak of a door from behind him and then the rumble of footsteps running up the stairs. That Colin, we said he was smart. Jonathan kind of blew it here, right? What he should have kind of gone the wrong way and never found him. I don't know. They were going to keep him down there until he found him, so I guess why not? Why waste time? But it seems like maybe it would have been a good idea to not find him to me, but he wasn't thinking. He just thought he was going to be abandoned down there. Okay, I think I'll read another one because that one's short, and this next one looks pretty short too. And I think one is too short to read. Chapter 23, An Intruder. As you know, there would be no note home today because he denied him any more notes, and he's downstairs. The lightning was constant and explosive and spectacular. It provided more light to the dining room than the candles that were lit on every table. Colin sat in a chair in the middle of the room, flanked by Roger and Francis. Rain pelted the huge windows. Thunder booms like cannon shots rattled the glass. The courtyard was a rain-lashed lake, reflecting the violent white cracks of lightning above. The wind shrieked between Slabhenge's tall towers like an army of furious ghosts. The sword glowed red and yellow in Sebastian's hand from the candlelight, except when it gleamed white in the lightning. The admiral's hat was back on his head, retrieved from Colin's room. His sneering mouth was busy chewing one of the reclaimed gold-wrapped chocolates. Jonathan stood off to one side with the others. Benny was holding him roughly with one hand, pinching harder than he needed to, his fingers like fangs in Jonathan's shoulder. Jonathan sniffed from time to time and rubbed at his nose with his arm. His sleeve was smeared with dark blood. When the boys had reached the top of the stairs to Colin's room, he tried quickly to slam the door, but it was too late. They'd burst in, and Sebastian had knocked him to the ground with one vicious punch. Colin was bleeding too, from a cut from his eye that Sebastian had given him when he tried to dash to the broken window and toss the Admiral's hat out. Admit it, Colin. You're the one who stole my chocolates. Of course I am. You found them in my room, Sebastian. Shut up. So you admit it then. Trespassing and theft. Yes. I went into the Admiral's room and took the Admiral's chocolates. It's my room, Sebastian shouted, getting right in Colin's face. The Admiral is dead. I'm in charge. When are you going to get that? Oh, I get it, Sebastian. Colin's voice was calm, soft, sad. I absolutely get it. Sebastian straightened back up. His face was eerily pale in the shifting lights. And we all saw what you did to Sinner's Sorrow. That's destruction of property. You have to be punished. There was an especially loud crack of thunder. Crack! Thunder. At the same moment, a particularly force gale of wind. One of the large windows shattered, sending shards of glass flying into the group of boys. They screamed and ducked and dove under the tables. Rain blew in through the broken window. Wind whipped through the rooms, blowing out most of the candles. Hold that little thief, Sebastian hollered. Relight those candles. The boys stood frozen, their eyes wide and scared. Oh, Jesus, guys. It's just like a little thunderstorm. Relight those candles. We'll cover the window in the morning. They got the candles lit, relit, and moved to tables farther from the broken window. They all shivered wetly in the storm that was now in the room with them. Punishment, Sebastian continued. His black hair was plastered to his forehead with rain. Water dripped from his face. He had to almost shout to be heard above the wind and the thunder and the pouring rain. The sinner's sorrow is ruined. So what could we do? What could we do to a thief and a criminal? The group blinked at him in silence. Teeth chattered. In some places, they cut off a thief's hand, Sebastian said. He held the sword up and looked at it, turning the blade to catch the light. His mouth widened into a grim smile. The tips of his teeth showed whitely. The group tensed. But that would be too messy. He stepped slowly closer to Colin and his captors. In other places, they just mark a thief. They carve a T into his forehead. Or his arm, or his chest. The smile disappeared. Put him on the table, he said. Hold him down. No, Jonathan cried, and Benny's arms jerked around his neck, holding him in a headlock. Colin wiggled and fought, but he was too small. The older boys wrestled him onto a table on his back and pinned him down. The lightning flashed. Thunder cracked so loudly the boys could feel it in their chests. It sounded like the thunder was coming from the prison. Come on, Sebastian. This is messed up, Tony argued. Shut up, Sebastian's voice was wild and furious. His face was twisted in anger. It was all white and black in the flashing light. It looked like a mask. Open him up. Bare his chest, he commanded, and the goons obeyed. Buttons popped and Colin's skin shone white in the twisted light. Sebastian stepped forward, brandishing the sword. Jonathan twisted with a surge of energy and broke loose from Benny's hold. He ran toward Sebastian. Sebastian turned to face him just as Jonathan slipped in a puddle on the floor. He hit the stone floor with a hard splash. He pulled himself quickly up to his hands and knees, and then Sebastian booted foot swung into his side like a sledgehammer. All the breath was kicked out of his lungs with a piercing whoosh of pain, and he rolled over onto his back. Sebastian stepped forward and pressed a foot onto Sebastian's neck. It was wet and cold and hard. Jonathan blinked and gasped for breath. His feet kicked in the puddle. His hands tugged at Sebastian's leg, but Sebastian just pressed down harder. The sword blade swung slowly around until it was inches from Jonathan's face, sharp and silver, and dripping rain onto his nose. You're next, Johnny, Sebastian said. Behind him, the door crashed open, letting in another mighty gust of wind. Damn it, Reggie, I told you! Sebastian started before he turned and looked and stopped. They all did. Someone was standing in the doorway. A stranger, on Slabhench, looking at them all standing there in the room, drenched, dining room. I came to warn you about the storm, he shouted. It was Patrick, the guy from the boat. He was wearing a yellow rain slicker, and he was out of breath. The boys all stood, frozen in the lightning and the flickering candlelight. Patrick's eyes seemed to focus. He saw Colin, bloody and pinned down on the top of the table. He saw the sinner's sorrow standing in splinters. He saw Sebastian soaked and furious and wearing the admiral's hat. He saw Jonathan lying on the floor with a bloody nose and a boot on his throat and sword to his face. Where is everybody? What in the world's going on here? He asked, taking a step back. Sebastian raised his sword and pointed at Patrick. Grab him, he said. Well, I think we got two more. We got, 6 chapters left. And I'm going to stop. 6 chapters left. I know you want to just finish it, don't you? I do. But I have to cook supper. It is 7:20 and I'm late cooking. So we will find out what happens next. Patrick from the boat delivery guys has been caught, and we're going to chapter 24, and it's called All the Grown-Ups Are Dead and Gone. So I guess that's what they're going to tell Patrick. So chapter 24 next time, tomorrow night. Just another day, and you get it. Bye for now.